Okay, enough. I have been tinkering with this bureaucratic DX conflict for hours now, and I have the absolute urge to punch a computer. Just ask me, why? Because I've been told to bold out my bowing Hanko while on a video call. Just picture it. A tiny, high-powered Gugs squatting down on his keyboard to take his all-important stamp function while trying to bow. It's cute, amusing, historically curious, kind of, but frustrating, especially when all you want is for the darn thing to work. Okay, reflecting on this historically, I guess this was always part of the process. I remember reading about emperors using pens to sign documents and then having the fact analysts check them. It sounds backwards. But here we are, and we're still going through it. But now we're adding a layer of modern technology. Interesting, amusing, frustrating, hopeful? Why not? Look how far we've come. We've got the history of it, the present of it, and the hopeful of it. Can this bowing Hanko be the birth of a new era? Remember, the hen, which is a punch, was also a standardized element. Why can't this be the next? Okay, so here's the scoop. The Hanko, which sometimes means punch, is the mark of approval in Parliament, a consultation, a government document, a private document. Interestingly, Japanese people still trust these quote-unquote signed documents. So, let's break this all down. First, let's look at the origins of the Hanko. Then, we'll dive into the bureaucracy. After that, we'll discuss the digital era. Then, we'll talk about responsibility. Finally, we'll talk about the Hanko conflict. Origins of the Hanko. The Hanko, which sometimes means punch, is the stamp used by Japanese people to authenticate or sign documents. Interestingly, it's found in both Japan, Korea, and China. More specifically, we can trace these records back to the ancient dynasties. In fact, their evolution has two parts: the traditional Hanko and the modern Hanko. Let's focus on the traditional Hanko. Chinese emperors started using Hanko sometime in the 7th century. When they did that, they started to stamp their records regularly. The Chinese also started applying Hanko to foreign documents. In fact, Hanko became the norm in Korea and Japan. In turn, Japanese emperors started using it in the 7th century. That's when modern documents were outlined like that. Bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is the central element. Let's start with the traditional bureaucracy. In the US, the bureaucracy is mostly seen as a negative concept. But in Japan, the bureaucracy has always been positive. Why is that? Well, traditionally, we've valued the public service. Moreover, we believed the bureaucracy is closely tied to government. In other words, we believed the bureaucracy is more trustworthy. Therefore, decentralization wasn't an option. Furthermore, we believed the bureaucracy is closely tied to complex issues. Finally, we believed the bureaucracy is closely tied to military conflict. Modern bureaucracy. Now that the bureaucracy has been tied to modern complex, there's a bit of a pushback against it. First, let's start with state conflict. The digitalization also can accompany this. Furthermore, we're starting to see technology conflicts. Finally, we're starting to see conflicts with animals. All in all, we can say that the modern bureaucracy is going through new paths and new paradigms. Digital era. Now that the digital era has arrived, let's discuss the digitalization. Of course, one of the benefits is the speed. That means that processes, accountability, and tracing all work faster. Furthermore, we can also make documents more secure. But also, we can eliminate unnecessary employees. Moreover, we can save a lot of time, money, and paper. Sometimes, digitization also makes it more effective. Finally, we can streamline operations. But there are downsides. For example, we may need to work different hours. Furthermore, we may need to question our traditional methods. Finally, we may need to update our education system. Responsibility. Now that we're talking about responsibility, let's discuss the responsibility conflict. Interestingly, the bureaucracy is key for both. By doing that, we can find purpose in our jobs. By doing that, we can also be more proactive. By doing that, we can prevent future issues. By doing that, we can also take responsibility. Finally, we can also show appreciation. But obstacles also occur. For example, we may not know enough about the topic. Furthermore, we may not have the tool experience. Finally, we may not have the time experience. Hanko. Now that we're talking about Hanko, let's discuss the Hanko conflict. Interestingly, the Japanese people still use the Hanko. Furthermore, a lot of people think they really need the Hanko. Finally, a lot of people think the Hanko is necessary. But there are obstacles. For example, we may not have the right tools. Furthermore, we may not have the right experience. Finally, we may not have the right information. Hanko conflict. Now that we're talking about Hanko conflict, let's discuss the conflict. Interestingly, the Japanese people are still using the Hanko. Furthermore, a lot of people think they really need the Hanko. Finally, a lot of people think the Hanko is necessary. But there are obstacles. For example, we may not have the right tools. Furthermore, we may not have the right experience. Finally, we may not have the right information. I could spend another hour diving into these policy parallels and dangerous conflicts, but honestly, I'd rather play video games. But I'm convinced. I'm not alone in this hopeful and frustrating effort. I'm hoping for change, and I'm hoping for a more hopeful tomorrow. You are closing a billion-dollar deal in Tokyo. The lawyers are there. The contract is 100 pages long. In New York, you would grab a Mont Blanc pen and sign heavily. In Japan, the CEO reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a tiny cylinder of ivory or wood. He dips it in red ink and, thump, he presses a red circle onto the paper. This is the Hanko, or Inkan. It is your legal soul. Without this red stamp, you do not exist. You cannot rent an apartment, open a bank account, or get married. In a country famous for robots and AI, the most powerful object is a wooden stick invented in ancient China. Why? And why, despite the government trying to kill it for years, does the Hanko refuse to die? Flashback to 2020, the pandemic. The government told everyone, stay home, work remotely. But the trains in Tokyo were still full. Why? Reporters asked the commuters, I have to go to the office, they said, to seal the documents. Japan's digital transformation was stopped cold by a piece of wood, because you cannot stamp a PDF. The Hanko is deep. It's not just a signature, it's an avatar. Japanese people have 3 or 4 different seals, one for casual use, delivery packages, one for the bank, one for life-changing events, real estate, marriage. To lose your Jitsu-in, registered seal, is worse than losing your passport. It is losing your identity. Today, we are going to press down hard on this tradition. We will look at the absurd etiquette of bowing Hankos, the bureaucracy of the ward office, and the fierce war currently being fought between the digital minister and the Hanko lobby. Yes, there is a Hanko lobby. To survive in Japan, you need to understand the arsenal of seals. Think of it like RPG weapons. Level 1, Mitomein, Acknowledgement Seal. This is your pistol. You buy it at the 100 yen shop if you have a common name like Sato or Tanaka. You use it to sign for packages, acknowledge you read a memo, or sign a kid's homework. It has no legal power. It just says, I saw this. Shachihata is the famous brand. It has built-in ink, click, 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 efficiency. Level 2, Ginkoin, Bank Seal. This is your assault rifle. When you open a bank account, you register this specific stamp, not your face, not your signature, the pattern of this wood. If you go to the bank to withdraw $10,000 and you bring the wrong stamp, even if it has your name on it, the teller will reject you. The impression does not match. You have to remember which stamp you used 10 years ago. It's a memory game. Level 3, Jitsuin, actual or true seal. This is your nuke. This stamp is hand-carved, unique. No two are alike. You must go to the city hall and register its impression in the government database. They give you a certificate of seal registration. You only take this out for 3 things: buying a house, buying a car, or inheriting an estate. When you press this, you are legally bound forever. It is terrifying. My hand shakes when I use my Jitsuin. The physical act of pressing down, champing the vermilion ink, adds a weight to the decision that a click on DocuSign can never match. Now, let's go to the office. Ringi show, approval documents. A proposal moves up the chain. Section chief, department manager, division head, director, CEO. Each person must stamp it to show approval. The paper becomes a collection of red circles. Here is where it gets crazy. There is a custom called ojigi Hanko, bowing Hanko. The subordinate must not stamp his seal straight. He must tilt it slightly to the left. Why? To look like he is bowing to the boss's stamp, which is straight. The section chief bows to the manager. The manager bows to the director. The result is a curve of stamps, all bowing to the CEO. It is the most Japanese thing ever invented. Even in 2D ink, we must maintain the hierarchy. Why do we do this? Diffusion of responsibility. In the US, the signature at the bottom. In Japan, look at the receipts. 10 people stamped it. We all approved it. Therefore, no one is uniquely to blame. The Hanko chain is a mechanism to ensure collective agreement, nemawashi, and collective defense. Enter the disruptor, Taro Kono, the Minister of Administrative Reform. In 2020, he declared war. Why are we printing paper just to stamp it? He launched a campaign to abolish Hanko requirements for 15,000 types of administrative procedures. Marriage registration? You can sign. Tax return? Online. The backlash was furious. The Liberal Democratic Hanko Guild, yes, real, fought back. They argued, the Hanko is Japanese culture. It is the soul of the contract. Digital signatures can be hacked. Wood cannot be hacked. They had a point about culture, but they were fighting a losing battle against efficiency. But old habits die hard. Even today, many companies digitally replicate the Hanko. They buy software that pastes a JPEG of a stamp onto a PDF. They even have digital bowing features. We replaced the wood with pixels, but we kept the psychology. We cannot let go of the red circle. But let's play devil's advocate. Why do we love it? Because a signature changes. My signature looks different when I'm drunk or tired. A Hanko is eternal. It is unchanging. There is a beauty in the craft. Hand-carved titanium or water buffalo horn. It is a talisman. Parents give their children a high-quality Hanko when they turn 20, coming of age. It symbolizes you are now an adult. You have responsibility. And there is the ritual of closure. Clicking accept on a terms of service agreement means nothing. Nobody reads it. But getting the ink, finding the spot, aligning the seal, and pushing, it forces you to pause. Do I really agree to this? It creates a moment of mindfulness in the transaction. Maybe we need more friction in our decisions, not less. I have my Jitsuin here. It has my name, it has registered my marriage, my mortgage. When I die, my son will use this to close my accounts. It is the baton of my legal existence. Japan is slowly, painfully moving to digital. The Hanko will eventually become a ceremonial object, like the sword. We won't use it for delivery packages anymore. But for the big things, I think the red stamp will survive. Because some promises are too heavy for a mouse click. So, if you come to live in Japan, your first quest is to get a Hanko. Don't just buy a cheap one. Get one carved. It's the best souvenir you can buy, a piece of identity. And remember, tilt it left if you want to be polite. Do you have a signature or a stamp? Which feels more binding to you? Stamp that subscribe button. Straight, no bowing needed. See you in the next video.
Hanko, Inkan, Japaneseシール、実印、認め印、バウイングハンコ、太郎このハンコは、ジャパニーズビュロクラシー、デジタルトランスフォーメーションジャパン、シグネチャー vs シール。
Hook, 200 words. Intro, 600 words. Part 1, 3 seals, 800 words. Part 2, bowing, 800 words. Part 3, war, 700 words. Part 4, craft, 600 words. Reflection, 400 words. Outro, 200 words. Total, 4,300 to 4,500 words. Persona alignment. Informed insider. Jitsu-in, Ginkgo-in, Mitome-in distinction. Ojigi Honko, Ringi Sho. Dape Y. Connection to diffusion of responsibility. Nuance. The fight between tradition, lobby, and efficiency, Kono.